The Summer Games Minute, brought to you by Mass Mutual. It is one of the most coveted trophies in the world, but are gold medals really gold? Well, mostly, they're not. The gold medals given out these days are nearly entirely silver and are plated with pure gold to give them that iconic sheen. Silver medals are, of course, made with silver, and bronze medals are a combination of copper and other metals like tin or zinc. And while winning an Olympic medal is priceless, the value of the materials in the medal are not. In recent games, some of the materials used to make the medals have come from recycled cell phones. Mass Mutual celebrates women's sports history and understands the nuances in how women want and need to manage their finances. With quality product solutions and guidance, a Mass Mutual financial professional can help you plan for both short-term and long-term money goals. Learn more and get started at massmutual.com.
As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code The Athletic. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
The Athletic.
Hello and welcome to the Race IndyCar podcast after what we are hopefully hilariously calling the 24 hours of the Indy 500. A phenomenal rain-delayed event that lived up to the hype and definitely gave something for the fans that stayed in the grandstands for so long, all 340,000+ of them. A fantastic show. Josef Newgarden, your winner. And on this week's episode, we will interview Josef. I've already interviewed Josef as I'm speaking to you now because we were actually one of the first people to get to speak to him after the race. It was really soon after, and it was awesome to do that, to get a really raw kind of interpretation of that win from Josef. And I know it's always nice to have him on the pod, and it was great. So I think without further ado, obviously we're going to get into some analysis of the race. J.R. Hildebrand's alongside me as well, of course. But before we do that, we'll head straight over and listen to this interview with Josef Newgarden. Josef, thanks so much for joining us so soon. We're sat overlooking the Arda bricks on the balcony here at the Pagoda, and you just won the Indy 500 for the second time. Talk us through the move that won the race. It's what everyone will, I guess, remember thinking back to this race when they're looking at it in the next few days. Such a spectacular move and an amazing way to do it. Were you surprised that Pato passed you as early as he did, and how much kind of planning went into how you went about that last lap and how you kind of prepared everything for it?
Yeah, I was a little surprised when he passed me, but at the same time, I didn't know what anybody's plan was, let alone mine. You know, it was very difficult to predict where the right place was. So I think it's hard to fault Pato for where he made his move, because it was really tough to analyze where that move needed to be made. But when he did, I thought, look, I gotta be on there, and right back by him. I wasn't trying to plan for the front straight, and I just tried to stay committed to my move on him in 3, and it was now or never when it came to that one. And so it was either going to work or it wasn't. I think a lot of the reason it did work was because it's Pato that I was racing. I think it's not like he didn't drive me hard, but he drove me fair, and he's a great champion. He's a great person to race, and that doesn't happen unless you're running against someone like him. So he could have easily won this race too, and he just, he did a great job, and I'm thankful it worked out. But it was by no means easy to understand how it was going to shape up. It's really tough to execute that final lap.
It kind of felt like the move you pulled on Scott at Texas a few years back. Like, it felt like that kind of, it's almost the last corner and right at the end of the race, a super kind of unpredictable outside move. How confident were you that the car was going to stick and that you were going to be able to pull that off?
I mean, I was not confident that it was going to work, but you can't second guess it. It's look, you got to put it out there, and it's either going to stick or it's not. I think if there was any corner to do it, turn 3 seemed like the right place to do it, because I had done some outside passing there in the race earlier. I sort of knew how that corner felt compared to the others, and that I didn't know that it was going to work, but it was either going to work or we were going to end on the wall. And I think that's how the Indy 500 is. If you want to win it, you have to lay it all on the line. You can't leave here saying, what if, or should I have done this? You got to go for it. And I think we were both going for it, and it just worked in our favor.
That ring on your finger is kind of sparkling my eyes out here. It's awesome. I guess when you got out of the car, you said, you don't care what people think about you or the team. And I guess everything that's happened this year, it's been a difficult ride for you in the sense of everything that happened at St. Pete, and then the races that you've had in the kind of aftermath of that. Obviously team members moving around as well. How much were you kind of driven and motivated by all of that coming into this month, and has it given you any extra motivation or meant that you've felt like you needed to prove something, or that there was anything kind of behind that, or have you tried to distance yourself from all of that and approach the race in like a more neutral way of not kind of letting that outside noise get to you, basically?
I haven't felt like I've had to prove anything, but it was an interesting process to go through. I'm in an odd way thankful for it. I think you've got to take a positive out of something so difficult like this. In a lot of ways, it's been very disappointing, and I wouldn't say just the surprise of what happened, but more the aftermath was really disappointing. It was illuminating. The whole experience was so illuminating from the exterior, and it just showed me, a lot of truth from the outside, and a lot of stuff I didn't like to see. And I think that comes with the territory and something like that. And so from that aspect, I'm thankful for it. But I wanted to get back to what I said in St. Pete. I started this year loving racing again, and I wanted to do that today. I wanted to enjoy the opportunity, and I think that's what you have to focus on at the Indy 500. It's so difficult to win this race. There's never a guarantee you're going to win it. So you just have to enjoy the opportunity of being there and potentially being able to win it. And I did that today. My team, I think, deserved it, and I had fun. I had fun driving the car. And, if I can have fun doing my job, as I should, it's the coolest job in the world, I should have fun doing it, and all of us together should have fun. If we can do that, then good things come.
I know last year was all about finally getting your Indy 500 win that people questioned you about every time you came to the Speedway. You haven't won a 500 yet, etc. Coming here this year, I guess for me it feels like the qualifying was just the foundation of everything you've done this year, and everyone knows how hard it is to come from 17th to win the 500. There's a reason why it doesn't happen very often, right? So how big a role do you feel that qualifying step forward has played? And I guess it just must feel so rewarding in the sense that it was such a difficult step for you to make, and it's taken a long time for you to make it, but you've actually, you've come here and totally nailed that aspect of something that was really difficult and that you weren't kind of nailing before. So talk a little bit about that.
Jack, it's a team victory. Anything at Indianapolis is a team victory through and through. I mean, that's the truth for everywhere, but I think it is magnified at Indianapolis. This track, more than anywhere else, you have to get every detail right. The team has to be perfect. You have to have a fast car. Look, we had fast cars last year. It was the best race car I've ever had up till today, but we didn't have the qualifying speed, as you talked about. And I think finally turning the page on that this year definitely took us to another level. It made things easier. It's not just the start, too. When you have more natural speed in the car, it makes everything better. It makes all process and jobs easier for the crew, the driver. And so it was a big step. It's a team victory through and through. They deserve it. Really proud of what they brought on qualifying day and proud that we were able to seal the deal on race day. I think we would have been disappointed, if we came here with such great race cars and such a big step and we weren't able to seal the deal with the race. So I think it's going to be very gratifying for the entire group.
Do you think you're going to be able to go away from this month now, having, we came into it, you had your book launch, which was fantastic. Look, great to see, you launched that children's book. You can feel free to talk about that in a second. You launched that book, you come in, you're so much better in qualifying than you've been in previous years. The practice running's good. You've got a good race car underneath you. You're starting much higher up than you have done in recent years. You've got that foundation to be able to go out and do something good in the race. And I know you've got that confidence in yourself that you've got the ability on an oval to go out and do that. It just feels like from start to finish, such a great storyline. And I guess that must feel like a weight lifted off your shoulders.
I think certainly recently, this whole thing has weighed on me tremendously more than, and I don't want to talk about it much. We're moving forward, but it has weighed on me more than I think people realize. And I don't need to dive into it. It is what it is in a lot of ways, and it's been a great month. It's been a great month, Jack. And this team, I wanted it for everybody. Everyone on the team deserves it, and they're going to relish in this, and they should. Luke, Tim, the people that, Robbie, everybody, Ron, everybody that wasn't here with us deserves to be here and to share in this. And we're so thankful. I'm very thankful that we were able to get back here and to, get back to what we do best, and that's working as a great team and executing on race day. And I felt like we did that this entire month, and they deserve it. So the book, just to touch on that, it's kind of funny. I thought, well, we'd worked on this for 6 months, Jack. It was like we've been planning this thing. Yeah, it's been a very exciting deal for us, and it was like we're still gonna release this. We really want to. We thought it would be great for kids, and there's not a lot of kids books in IndyCar, so hopefully this helps a little bit, and it's good timing.
Yeah, and to be able to bring your son to the Speedway, to win the 500 twice, and then to do a kid's book, and it's just it's like everything's come together at the perfect time for you.
Yeah, it has. I mean, I don't know that you don't always get what you want in life, Jack, but this has been very, I'm very grateful for what's happened this month, and it's the result of a lot of people just pulling together and working hard and trying to enjoy themselves. I mean, it sounds simple and a little cheesy, but I think that's what you have to do. You just, time has a beautiful way of healing things and showing the truth. And I think even in just this short period of time, last couple, 2-3 weeks, it's really had a healing effect on all of us, which is great.
Talk about some of those people who did come into the team, because you said in the build up to the event that you felt like that, you had a really strong bench here, and that you feel like maybe not that everyone's interchangeable, but that you do have a lot of great people in your team, and the fact that you had new people coming in was an opportunity rather than a hindrance. It was an opportunity for new people to come in and show what they can do to bring something new potentially to the team, and they've clearly not stopped you from winning the 500. So,
well, I got to say we brought in some all-star hitters. I touched on this earlier in the media room, but I of course, first off, I miss Luke and Tim. They're my right-hand guys. Like we are, we're together thick and thin, and I lean on them, tremendously throughout the year. So my first desire would be to have my team together, all of us as a group, and because the circumstance changed and we weren't able to do that, the two individuals that we brought in on the two cars specifically, Jonathan Duguid, Raul Prados, they are all-star hitters. They're two engineers that I've worked with over the last 8 years in some capacity at Team Penske, and I always thought it'd be great to work with them full time, both Jonathan and Raul. I'm like, wow, it would be great to have Jonathan engineer me at some time, full capacity in IndyCar, and same thing with Raul. And so in an odd way, I was really excited. I was like, wow, I finally get an opportunity to work with these guys, and we're gonna pick up right where we left off. And look, Luke's already done all the homework, and like we can just step these guys in, learn a little bit more together, have their perspective, and try and nail it. And I think in a lot of ways, that's what we did this month.
I know that you're being punched in the face by media and that it's now 10 p.m. on the day that you've won the Indy 500 after a huge rain delay. Yeah, exactly. I shouldn't have reminded you of that, should I? How much have you thought about how you might celebrate this one, and will it be as simple as just literally spending some time at home and kind of unwinding, or is there anything you want to do to celebrate this one? Because I know it was kind of like it was such a whirlwind last year, and I think you were a little bit prepared for what it was going to be like, but I think you were also taken by surprise at how much you were going to, you had to do as well at the same time. So how do you kind of feel about this one? And I know we talked about you enjoying your racing more and wanting to stay on that kind of mentality. So how do you go about, celebrating this one, and what will you do?
I should be more prepared now, Jack. I don't know that I am. I hope that I am. It's a tough process to go through. Look at, if you're gonna pick or choose, it's a good problem to have, but you sort of have to go through it to understand it. I liken it to building a house. If you've never built a house, you almost have to build a house once to then understand how to build a house. And that's kind of what this win feels. It's like you don't know how to go through it until you win it, and then when you win it, you're like, oh, okay, now maybe next time I'll be better at doing it. And I just, for me, it's tough. It's all part of the gig that you got to, be forward-facing in front of a lot of people, and especially when you win the Indy 500. Doesn't work super well for me. I need my time. I definitely need my personal time to reset. It's just the way I'm wired. So I'm going to try and be better at that, but also champion the event. I want this event to flourish. I want the IndyCar series to flourish. So I'm going to go through all that process, and I'm going to try and measure myself a little bit more so that, last year I said I didn't want to fall into the slump in the season, and, we've already had some curveballs this year, and this could add another one. So I just don't want it to, I don't want it to add lingering effects, and I want to be able to get back on it in Detroit and, still focus forward.
Roger's had his first front row sweep at the 500 since 1988, and also you've been the driver to give him his 20th Indy 500 win, which I know he was obviously thinking about in 2019, the last time, but also as in like a few years back, he was already thinking about it in 2019, but I know he was thinking about it even earlier than that as well, that he'd kind of picked out 20 as a milestone a long time ago that he wanted to reach. So, I mean, knowing what Roger's done for you in your career, what does it mean for you to be that driver, especially when I know you're all really friendly and that's cool, but you're also competitive teammates as well, and you all want to be the ones to win. So what does that mean to you to be the driver to deliver that for Roger?
It's how could it not be gratifying? It's tremendously gratifying. It is a tough job. This is not like traditional sports in that specific respect. When you have teammates next to you, you want to have a good camaraderie. You want to be on good terms, and you want to work together. It's critical that we work together. That's how we push each other and find speed. But at the same time, when it really comes down to the race, it's kind of every man for himself, and it's just how it works. So it's a really tough balance. It's not like a traditional team sport where you can rally next to every single teammate. Here there's just a couple teammates you can't always rally next to. So we all wanted it. I'm sure everybody wanted to win this race, and that's how I feel. But it was very gratifying. I mean, I'm proud of Roger. I'm proud for him. I'm thankful for him, to be quite honest. He's the most stand-up individual that I've ever encountered or worked for. He's just a all-class guy. I'm telling you, there's no one that has more integrity than that man, and I've witnessed it numerous times across my career with him. So it's been very gratifying to deliver for him and the opportunity that he's given for me. And he's typical RP. He's ready for the next. I mean, he's already up the road. He wants 21 now. So I just like that mentality. That's how I feel about things too.
Joseph, it's been a tough day for you, and we want to let you go here. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And I know it's been a tough start to the year for you, but this is the perfect way to turn that around. And I'm sure you're really proud. So I hope you get to enjoy this one and do something for yourself in the process of celebrating, because it's. I know how much the first one meant to you, but I feel like this one's going to mean just as much in the kind of aftermath of feeling what it's done for your career and for yourself as well.
Yeah, I appreciate you, Jack. Thanks for everything you do, and let's get up the road here in the season.
We love talking stats here at The Athletic. Here's one that's super simple to remember. Discover automatically doubles the cash back you've earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back to $300. That's right. You could put it towards some memorabilia you've had your eye on, or treat yourself to a premium sports network. You earn, and Discover doubles. See terms at discover.com/credit card.
We'll get back to the pod in a moment, but first of all, let me tell you about Grammarly. Email, Google Docs, Slack, you write across multiple platforms and places during your workday, so delivering consistent, high-quality communication everywhere is key. Grammarly is an AI writing partner that helps you get work done faster with high-quality writing for better projects, proposals, presentations, and more. Best of all, Grammarly works where you work, so you can get more done no matter what tools you use. As a journalist and podcast host, I'm constantly writing and rewriting copy and drawing up scripts. It's part of the job, and Grammarly helps make it faster. It's got some really cool features like tone suggestions to help you strike the right balance between direct and friendly in work emails. Plus, Grammarly has a ton of other great features like advanced spelling, grammar, punctuation, and conciseness suggestions to ensure your writing is professional, mistake-free, and clear. Get AI writing support that works where you work. Sign up and download for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's GRAMMARLY.com/podcast. Easier said, done.
All right. 20th Team Penske win, JR. Massive achievement by the team. So much going on in terms of the weather. We didn't really know if we were going to get the race in on Sunday, if it was going to be delayed till Monday. We had the whole Kyle Larson situation. Was he going to stay? Was he going to go? I think a lot of people by the time we got to Sunday expected him to stay anyway, but there was always that kind of element of doubt of what Hendrick would do with Larson needing a playoff waiver if he missed the Charlotte NASCAR race. Yeah, so much interesting stuff happening in the build-up, and then the race really delivered. I feel like we'll get into the race in a minute. It was just such a crazy 500, one of the wildest kind of, at least first 100 laps that I remember in recent times, and the weather often brings that out in drivers who feel like they need to get to the front in the first 100 laps in case the race gets called at halfway. Luckily, it was super sunny at halfway, and there wasn't any worry about the rain, the race being stopped because of rain. The bigger worry was the light and the curfew of 8:15, which we were kind of careering towards as we had more and more cautions. But luckily, we got the whole race in. As you've listened to there, Josef Newgarden, the winner, and gave you a really honest and insightful interview. JR, just from a driver's perspective, not just because you know Josef, but just because you've been in these situations before where you have so much adversity in a 500 to go up against. And I guess what do you think about the kind of the fortitude that Josef's shown to be able to come back and win this race? Because it's not just defending your 500, which we already know is such a difficult thing to do. It's not been done a lot in recent years, but at the same time, you know, I feel like he's gone through, he and his significant sort of Penske names involved in the push to pass scandal that involved him being disqualified at St Pete have meant that he's gone through this character assassination basically in the media, and you know, everyone wants to talk about what they think about Josef, what he's done, and the team, of course, as well, and even Rogers, you know, been called into question in the sense that he owns the series and he owns the team, and people, you know, questioning how the series can operate in terms of penalising, you know, Rogers' team and stuff like this, and for them to not only win the 500, but to make such an improvement in qualifying, which is just so difficult to do, lock out the front row, and that was really the foundation for their victory. What I know you've not been through that exact set of circumstances, as no other driver has, but maybe you can talk a little bit about that, the fortitude involved to be able to come back from something like that and be able to not just compete at a high level, but, you know, to pull off one of the best passes in recent memory that we can remember up against one of the fiercest competitors, and a rare scenario where we've probably got the two best oval racers in the series at the moment going for the win on the last lap of the Indy 500 at basically the second to last corner. So yeah, I wonder what you think about that.
I guess I think that ultimately the way that the race actually played out, which was, to your point, very intense racing for the first half of the race, and then through this period of fuel save, basically from kind of the halfway point through to getting into, you know, there ended up being caution that sort of negated that, but basically into the last couple of fuel stints that you know, so you kind of had very hectic and chaotic flat out racing for a period of time. Then you had this kind of weird period of time where it's like if you're at the front, you're just playing defense, but still having to make a lot of somewhat aggressive decisions. You have in order to maintain track position while you've got these two different strategies going on, and the leaders are running quite slow, so it's really easy to pass. I mean, how many times we saw the car that was third in line end up at the front with after a big toe down the front straightaway. This was not a situation, basically because you had these mixed strategies. There were some cars that were just going to go, that were trying to go flat out. And so you had this kind of weird situation where rather than, I mean, I remember last year's 500, there was a long period of the race that seemed kind of boring, basically, because the same thing was basically happening for the drivers that were on lead strategy, which was they were all just trying to save fuel. But that they were all basically just like sitting in line saving fuel. There wasn't a lot of like passing or moving around or whatever going on. And so this year was very different from that. You still went through that same phase of the race, but guys were, every time that the leader was pulling back, the guy that was third in line was just blowing by everybody. And you kind of ended up with this, major musical chairs going on, which can at that point, then if you are one of those cars, like if you're in the lead, I mean, you saw this with McLaughlin a lot because he was frequently kind of the lead car on the lead strategy, but that he was having to really battle back up into, to gain that track position back. Like if you're not driving aggressively or very assertively trying to look out for your track position in that scenario, you could suddenly find yourself between 6th and 10th, having been the leader of the race, because since everybody's so jammed up, there's a lot of opportunity basically to take advantage of the fact that just for one straightaway, the cars in front of you are kind of like backing up towards you. Typically everybody's doing enough of the same thing that you kind of just let it go. You're like, all right, well, this is just going to be a momentary gain that I'm making. So, the cars that are kind of 6th through 10th will maybe be trying to pick off a car or two in front of them, but you don't have this cycling happening all the way up at the front. And so I guess because of that, because you went through this initial phase of the race where just everybody's seems like they're sort of driving like it's, 50 to go. And then this other phase of the race, which is fuel save, but a lot of track position up for grabs and people taking advantage of it in a situation that they kind of normally don't. Then the final two stints where fuel save was not as big of a deal, but you just had the race up to that point turning into this, mano a mano, just battle, throughout the top 10, really. That and again mixed with cars that are kind of for those drivers, kind of cars that are like getting in the way. I mean, I guess sort of at that point the field had shuffled itself more or less, but it shuffled out in a way that was a lot of guys ended up where they didn't think they should have been, kind of like with cars in front of them or whatever that hadn't been for a long time and that maybe weren't really up to the task of running at the front. And so you had basically Rossi and Pato and McLaughlin and Newgarden, those drivers in particular that had sort of been in control of the race for most of the race. They were then suddenly spread out throughout the top 10 and kind of having to figure out how to work their way back to the front. Dixon at that point had gotten to the front, sort of by virtue of being able to take advantage of this weird fuel save situation and being a little just as happens often with the 9 crew, like just off strategy by enough that when all of that shook out, he leapfrogged a bunch of cars. But that, I guess the point that I'm making here is that just the race being that way really caters to a driver like Josef, who has this just hyper competitive fire and also the requisite skill set to make the right decision when it counts in those situations. This was in a lot of ways like racing at Iowa. That at Iowa you end up in this situation because you're just instantly in traffic, basically. So you're just constantly having to kind of dissect what the car in front of you is doing to figure out how to get around them, and you have to be really aggressive on starts and restarts, and you have to really prioritize track position while you're battling a bunch of other cars. That's not usually the way the Indy 500 really works. It obviously also it these guys benefited from having obviously really good stuff. Newgarden had worked his way up through the pack very genuinely in a way that we haven't really seen guys do, to be frank. Last year, him winning the race last year was in large part, you can kind of, if we just ignore the way the actual end of the race worked out, him just being in that position really came down to him actually passing guys on track. And like, he was on the same strategy as a lot of cars and ended up just working his way to the front. So I think this was just kind of the perfect storm in that sense of, he knew he could do that if he had to. He really trusted what he had underneath him on restarts, which proved to be super important. You needed to be aggressive with your decision making to stay at the front in this race. Like if you treated this race like a lot of Indy 500s, you would have just found yourself kind of like 8th or 10th before you even realized what had happened. And probably just due to not assertively enough, like holding your position, attacking the car in front of you when it was available to you. Like if you weren't doing that in a lot of phases of this race, you were going to end up just going backwards. I thought it was kind of interesting that Kyle Larson, in some sense, was an example of that during the race, that it was just like, wow, this suddenly turned into something that's very different than the way that we were practicing on Monday. Like you did have this distinctly elevated level of how intensely guys were racing each other and how assertively they were, taking advantage of those little opportunities when they arose, which just kind of doesn't usually happen quite like that. It's always more intense on race day than it is in practice, but the sort of difference between those two things was much greater yesterday than it was, for this 500 than it tends to be. You get some point in the race where like things settle down a little bit, and it just didn't happen that way in this event for some various reasons. But that all kind of played into Joseph's hand here. Like he's very good at those things. He's also, I think, prone to defaulting to that kind of mindset, of like, okay, like screw it all, I'm just gonna like go to the front. As soon as he as soon as he has like a half a moment where he's not being given as much room as the guy that's kind of the guy at these tracks at this point, like he's the man at these places. As soon as his respect is, even remotely sort of challenged, his default is just like, screw it, I'm going to the front. Like, forget all of you guys. I think you needed that mindset to be, or that's certainly a mindset that can get you to the front, like can keep you at the front in these kinds of events. It's not like that's faultless in terms of you could be some downside for sure of ending up that way. He managed to kind of find just the right, mental attitude to have to like not go over the top there. I mean, I feel like that's a little bit of something that we have faulted like Pato sometimes for, not even necessarily in oval racing, but like for being a little over the top, being a little, it's hard to not have like urgency or a little bit of that anxiety of like needing to make something happen start to factor in. And we've just seen over the years, particularly in these oval races, that Josef manages to sort of keep that at bay. And then you get to the final stint, you get to this last stanza of the race where he is at the front and it's basically him against Pato, more or less. And we've just seen more often than not that he sort of comes out on top in those kind of situations. There was a bunch of little decisions that you can see. I mean, even just the way that he like didn't dive down off of turn two on the final lap to immediately try to like catch Pato's toe. It's something that a lot, as a race car driver, even though I've been out of the car for the last couple of years, it's something that I found myself wondering about and kind of thinking that I think like when you're the car that's behind, working as hard as guys tend to in this kind of dragon situation to immediately catch to immediately like get in tow with the lead car. The reason that maneuver works is not just that you're breaking the toe, but you're making the car behind you understeer a lot. So having to like pour wheel in it while you've got like aero wash is just this added mega scrub that is not allowing your car to accelerate off the corner. Like that's why guys are doing this, the lead car, because you've got better aero, you've got, the advantage just from a handling perspective, dive to the bottom off the corner. It was just it just looked like he was in control, Joseph, basically, throughout this whole sort of period. And not necessarily like he could have not won the race. He could have like looked that way and not ended up winning. But there's just sort of an air about him, and I think that you experience this racing against him probably at this point in these situations. It's just kind of like if he's coming, it just seems like he's coming like a freight train, and there's not a lot that you can do about it. He's built up that type of he's built up, I think, that mindset internally that like that's gonna be how he is perceived in these situations. And he's backed it up more often than not.
I mentioned it to him in the interview, but it felt like the pass he made on McLaughlin at Texas a couple of years back, that pass, in the sense that you just don't expect someone to be able to do that. He said in the interview that he'd felt like he'd done it earlier in the race, but I don't know if he'd done it that aggressively earlier in the race and with the person on the inside not kind of bailing out or accepting that they're being passed at that point, which is obviously not what Pato would be doing on the last lap of the race. So I feel like he's got this knack to make these incredible moves, and I think he's definitely established himself as the best oval racer in the series right now, and that plays into what you were saying about his internal mindset of him, being recalcitrant to any sort of competition or people trying to be on the same level as him. He's like, no, that's me. I'm the best out here, and I deserve to be here, and I've earned this, and that's kind of how he approaches it. So, yeah. Fascinating insight into the whole race there, really, JR, in terms of how it played out. I think props to the package, because we had so many Chevrolets there that you were talking about the kind of ease of someone from three cars back kind of moving their way to the front, but for almost the whole race that was exclusively Chevrolets. So it's not like we've got some sort of Chevrolet versus Honda like horsepower disadvantage or something here in terms of why people are able to pass so easily. It's like the package is working well, and maybe the harder tyre had a little bit to play into that as well. People not having to save the tyre so much and being able to push on. Fuel being more of a problem, I guess, in a lot of the stints. But yeah, it was a really interesting race to watch all of that unfold. Kind of want to get into Pato a little bit. He was obviously kind of tear-filled after the race, and feels like he's had 5 chances to win the 500 now and not been able to get it over the line. I guess he's been so strong at the Speedway, especially, and we've kind of gone on this journey with him. Of, you mentioned like a couple of years ago he was deemed to be too aggressive when he had that incident with Marcus Ericsson, or last year even, and then the year before that he'd obviously people had said that he hadn't been aggressive enough in his defence against Marcus Ericsson. So I guess he's kind of gone through this journey of people saying he's like giving it up too easy, and then people are saying he's been too risky, and then this year again I'm sure there'll be questions of like what he could have done differently or how he could have stopped Josef coming to the front. And I guess sometimes as a driver, you just have to accept that it's not your day and that, somebody else has just done a better job, and that, they're in a different team, they've got a different car, and that they've done the better job. But what part of this, JR, from your perspective, is like, I know Pato knows that. He knows he's not going to win every race in his IndyCar career. He's accepting that other people are going to beat him at occasions. But for that to happen 5 times, and for it to happen at the Speedway, where he's just so desperate to get that victory, I guess as a driver, that's going to be difficult to kind of compute that happening so often, and it probably feeling like it's out of his control to a certain extent, which makes it kind of worse from a driving perspective. Like if we go back and look at his double save off turn 2, or I watched his whole final stint pretty much on board, and his car was just so sketchy. Like I don't think people realize how not like Josef Newgarden's car Pato's car was, and to kind of watch that on board I felt like I was watching something like amazing happening in front of me. Like, I mean, obviously amazing things happen in sport, and you enjoy witnessing an Indy 500 winner and stuff like that, but that, like, watching that stint actually felt like I was watching something spectacular unfolding before me, which is I don't say that lightly. So how does Pato come back from this? He seems to have done everything correctly. He kind of willed that car into position to win, and it's just another year he hasn't been able to get it over the line.
Yeah, I think there's a few things that stand out. One is, I think we're probably not, generally speaking, we're not giving Pato quite enough credit for the fact that the car just, and I'll kind of dig into this a little bit more, like in terms of why this is or whatever, but we're not giving him enough credit for the fact that the car just isn't in the same kind of neighborhood. It doesn't seem like, as some of the other cars that are running up front. He's having to do something just to keep the thing on the straight and narrow, getting around the racetrack. That is, far more difficult than what it seems like the average other guy is. Now, there's a part of that I guess I'd be interested. I didn't see any of, basically I saw the little highlight clips kind of Pato's onboard.
Yeah, me too.
I didn't see any of Rossi's onboard. I'd be interested, since they were both running up front, like how much different were the two of them? Like there's some of this stuff that's, I wonder sometimes whether we've kind of given Pato this kind of fast hands, moniker. Like, how much of that is really necessary? I mean, I still remember talking to Montoya when he was the extra car there. We were pitted next to each other or something like a few years ago, and this is coming from Juan Montoya, who in his day was talked about in exactly the same breath, like the guy that had the quickest hands in the paddock by a bunch. That there was an element of the way that he talked about the setups that Pato was running compared to the setup that he was running, that he was just kind of like, I just don't like, it's just not how I'd set the car up, basically. And that's coming from a 2-time Indy 500 winner who kind of knows what you need, like, or at least and the cars have changed and things have changed, and Pato's had incredible, outcomes at these speedways, driving the car just how he's driving it. So it's not like it would be different if we were sitting here like, oh, he ends up just like wrecking off of turn 2 3 out of the last 4 500s or something. That's not what's happened. So there's only so much that you can read into it and say somehow it's wrong, or that he's looking for the wrong thing or whatever. But I guess it to me, more generally, it just points to the fact that the Aero McLaren car that Pato is in just isn't, it seems like maybe still just isn't quite there, basically. That was also my feeling, I guess, like 2 years ago, when it seems like he basically had the opportunity to do what Josef Newgarden just did to him into turn 3. He had that same opportunity into turn 1 with Marcus, with like a couple to go, and didn't, backed out of the outside pass. And in my mind, kind of the only good reason that you do that is just if the thing is so on edge that your butt is basically telling you like you are 100% going to crash if you like that, like there's just absolutely no way that you can pull off this maneuver. I think probably if you gave that back to Pato, just knowing if knowing that he ended up coming in second there, knowing that he came in second here, knowing that the year in between it like didn't go his way, whatever. Probably if you gave it back to him, he'd just go, all right, well maybe there's a 1 in 1,000 chance that I pull that off, and like I'll take my odds on finishing 30th instead of second again, by trying that. But I guess I think a little bit of just the outcomes that Pato has had to me sort of point to whether it's his own kind of direction that he's taken the car, or it's the setup philosophy that McLaren has, or it's something in between. Um, it just seems like he's kind of punching above his weight to kind of end up where he ends up in these races as it is. And so it's hard to have that perspective when you're just looking at the results. But yeah, the cars just never look easy. They seem like they're just trimmed out on the ragged edge just to kind of be in the general vicinity of where he's at track position wise by the end of these races. And so I guess I'm probably just having seen some of the onboards and recognizing that that's the case. I've definitely been in situations, not necessarily at Indy, but been in situations at other places that are like that. That it sort of change when the car is that hard to get through the corner after corner, lap after lap. It does really impact how you think about you end up being a tiny bit more timid to just like chuck it in these situations. And obviously, Newgarden was in a position where he just wasn't. The car, he felt throughout the entire race, you could see he was as frequently as anybody hanging the thing in the second lane, on restarts, like committed, blowing by guys. So that I think is more than anything. That's kind of my takeaway from watching Pato's race. And frankly, like I don't think there was much he was going to do, in the end there. I don't like there's certainly nothing obvious that you could point to and say, oh, he should have done this or that. He basically got like a very decisive and perfectly timed move put on him. And as you saw throughout the race, there just wasn't a lot I mean, that's where I think I'm kind of, I'll push back a little bit on the idea that this is like the greatest package, that we've had, which is basically just that I think it's almost like, there's a restrictor plate element to it, which is just that you've got this situation in Pato O'Ward, who the guy is absolutely just driving the wheels off of this thing, and it just doesn't end up counting for anything, up at the front. Like if you're the leader, you're just a sitting duck. And throughout the entire race, that's in essence what was making it exciting, was just that the leader is a sitting duck in all scenarios. Which fundamentally, I guess I just don't, it creates for these, it creates for like a lot of passing. It creates for a lot of, wheel to wheel racing. It creates for these last lap, you have no unpredictability. Like you have no idea what's going to happen until the last lap. But the thing that I struggle with, having watched watched these races just be like this for so long, is, and racing in them when they're like this, is it just does it also at the same time doesn't really create for much separation from just a pure driving perspective. It creates for separation. You kind of see the decision making process that guys have compared to each other, and like that's the thing that is created for when these passes happen, and like who's at the front, who's not, and whatever. But I guess I just kind of wonder, like, is that the ultimate merit that we want to pin kind of like the product of IndyCar at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway on? I think every time we've had extremely deserving winners. Like it's not like people who shouldn't be in contention for winning the race R or something. But I guess when you have these kind of situations where a driver like Pato is driving the car really as extraordinarily as he is, just corner to corner, and you sort of have to have the onboard and you have to have it pointed out to you that that's what's happening. um I guess I don't love that aspect.
I wanted to pick up on one of the things you said, and it was about only Pato really knowing what his car is capable of. And I think it's been very easy in these two very high profile situations where he was passed by Marcus and he was passed by Josef here, for people on the outside to say, what could you have done differently? Or to basically, for their interpretation of that situation not to be that Josef Newgarden and Marcus Ericsson have just made have a better package and have delivered a phenomenal piece of driving that has allowed them to move to the front of the Indy 500. And their interpretation instead is that Pato O'Ward has done something wrong in that situation in order for that to happen. And I think there's a disconnect there. There's like a middle ground between those two things, and that is that we're not sat in Pato's seat and don't know what his car is capable of. So a lot of people will say, why did Pato make the move into turn one and then make himself the sitting duck for the rest of the lap? Maybe Pato knows that he can't go around the outside of turn three like Josef did, and Josef knows that he can because he'd said he'd done it earlier in the race and that he was relatively confident of that happening.
Yeah, look at how bad Pato's car looked through turn two when you saw the replays. It's like there's always a straightaway that it's easier to make a pass on. I think that straightaway was down the front straight in this. It's usually because of wind or whatever. Like whichever straightaway you have a little bit of a headwind on is always going to be an easier straightaway to pass. It seemed like that just for whatever reason was, out of four down the front straight. So Pato made his move there. He knows that he's going to have a hard time making it happen probably through two. Josef was good down the back straight. If I mean, I didn't mean to cut you off on this, but I totally, I was watching it just thinking like Pato's basically done everything he can do here. He's kind of timed this. He's played the cat and mouse. He was leading. He also put himself in the lead of the race at a time when it's, very likely that a caution comes out, and not that it's like a better than 50% odds that a caution comes out, but just if a caution is going to come out late, it happens right at the end. Like, he was in the lead of the race then. I think Josef was the one guy in the one car that had a shot at making the pass that he ended up making. And so to your point, I think it's like we need to just give a lot of credit to the guys that end up beating Pato in these situations. And still, I think the difference between this one and the one 2 years ago was that there was this very evident moment where Pato kind of had the run and had a chance, it looked like, to put a move on Marcus. It was going to be a difficult, it was going to be like this pass that we saw from Josef, where even until you can really see that he's ahead of Pato and Pato's kind of backing out of it at the apex. When they bent into the corner, I was sitting there like, oh, both these guys are gonna crash, basically. Like there's at least a 50% chance based on where they are bending into the corner. Like both of them are committed. Nobody's gonna lift until they've lost, basically here. It was kind of looked that same situation that Pato had Marcus set up for, but then we have to be able to read between the lines a little bit there, and sort of, I'm certainly willing to give Pato the benefit of the doubt in that situation, just knowing that it is all there on the table for you, and Pato is not the kind of guy that is just going to like, not kind of live up to the moment or something. Like it's not because he's the gravity of that situation is making it so he's like suddenly become timid. I think you have to just look at that and say the fact that he was even there, the fact that he was even in that situation and had manufactured himself a shot at it probably was something that we need to be, celebrating and like giving major kudos for.
Couldn't agree more. JR, we'll get to Kyle Larson in a second, but I just want to run through very quickly some mentions of some other storylines in the race, just so that we're trying to cover everything off. We obviously can't analyse everything, but especially at the back end of the top 10, I wanted to kind of shout out a few people like Connor Daly, who started 29th and finished 10th. He was the biggest mover of the race, and I know he's really well loved at the Speedway and has a big reputation at Indianapolis. A lot of people want him to win the race and are big supporters of his, so it was cool to see him do that. He pitted on that, I think it was the first caution, and then kind of went longer than everybody else in the stints and kind of made that strategy work at the end, which was cool. And just behind him was Callum Ilott, who did start 15th, so 11th might not sound like the best finish ever, but he had the weight jacket jammed on for the whole race and had to go to the back of the pack before the race even started. So he'd actually worked his way back from 33rd effectively, if you think about it like that. And with the car ill handling, I think 11th is a pretty phenomenal job. Christian Rasmussen was the highest finishing rookie and 12th just behind as well. So a really cool kind of gaggle of cars there. Christian Lundgaard as well. In 13th had made his way up through the field as well. Rasmussen looked really racy through the whole event really, and I was quite impressed with how he took on the race. It felt like he was really aggressive in certain moments, but I also felt like he kind of nailed that give and take of the 500 of like, you can't just be super aggressive, especially as a rookie, like for the whole race. Like you need to give a bit of, you need to give a bit to get a bit basically, and that's I felt like that's exactly what he did. A couple of high profile losses. We had Colton Herta, who many picked out as one of the pre-race favourites, or at least in terms of when people had been watching the practice run and felt like he had one of the best looking race cars. He crashed out. Will Power as well crashed out from the race as well. And Honda had a bit of a difficult run with some engine failures there, specifically for Felix Rosenqvist, or at least I shouldn't say engine failures because we haven't had all the information back yet, but there was a load of smoke pouring out the back of the cars, so I think we can at least do a bit of adding 2 and 2 together there. Marcus Armstrong as well was one who was hit by that. Kind of ends Felix Rosenqvist's run of top 10 results. So just a quick round of some storylines. We obviously not got through everything. Marcus Ericsson was another one who was taken out of the first corner there. Probably the root of that being his crash in practice and him qualifying so far back in the race. But I feel like that's rounded up at least some of the storylines that we're not going to be able to analyse in a super amount of detail. Let's get on to Kyle Larson. I was watching his onboard for the first pretty much 3/4 of the race until he fell back at the end there with the pit speeding penalty. A couple of things we'll get into, JR, and I'll get your thoughts on. First of all, it was cool that he stayed for the race. I think that kept a lot of people watching, and I can imagine there was a lot of NASCAR fans who might have switched off or not kind of stuck with the 500 if Kyle hadn't started that race and he'd left to go to Charlotte. So that was the first thing. That was cool to see. The second thing that was really evident to me was from his radio and from watching his onboard was that he just learnt from every single mistake that was made. It was really cool to see. I think the first high profile thing was the first restart where he did a double upshift by accident. I think the root of that was that he'd been in too low a gear before, and then it kind of just messed up his restart in terms of the gears that he was in, and tapped the paddle twice by accident. But on the next restart, he went round the outside of turn 1 and passed someone straight into the first corner. So that was quite cool to see. It was like, okay, so you've worked this out now. He also, I was quite impressed by, it's a very small thing, but I was quite impressed by the fact that after that shift issue and him like dropping through the field, he didn't really say anything on the radio. He wasn't straight on the radio like shouting or asking what was happening or questioning the team or trying to analyse it. He just got his head down and just started making passes and tried to move forward. And the next caution a few laps later, that's the first time he'd mentioned, he was like, oh, what's happened there? Like it felt weird. I don't know if I was in the wrong gear or what happened. So that was cool to see. I felt like that was a good example of him, like his just really calm and pragmatic approach to the race. And if you watch his onboard, I don't think we saw a whole lot of it on TV, which is pretty disappointing, I think. But he made a lot of really good overtakes and looked really racy in a lot of the situations where people were finding it difficult to pass, and he was able to make moves. And I guess part of that was that he was a little bit out of position for the first portion of the race there, because he dropped back on that restart and then was trying to fight back from it. And then McLaren just took a massive swing at the end there, trying to get him to the end. it was like 42 or 43 laps to the end he needed to go, and obviously a stint's like 30 to 35 laps, so it was massive fuel save and hoping for a caution. I didn't like that strategy at all, just based on the fact that I think if there was a caution, he just would have been a sitting duck on all the tyres, and I very much doubt he would have won the race with that strategy personally. But the McLaren guy seemed to think that he could. They were telling him on the radio that they felt he could win the race if he just gave them the fuel number, and obviously that caution came out, but it didn't come. He had to pit, and once he pitted, he was kind of in the same situation as all of the drivers around him. He was just kind of stuck in a train of cars that weren't able to move so deep in the pack, around that kind of 18th, 17th position. He obviously qualified 5th. I think he'll be in with a good shout of winning Rookie of the Year, even though he finished behind Christian Rasmussen, just because of the media attention and fan interaction that he's brought to the event. A bit like we saw with Jimmy Johnson and David Lucas a few years back, where Jimmy Johnson won the Rookie of the Year award despite crashing out of the race. And David Lucas was, I think, and his team were pretty upset with that, having had a good finish and not winning that award. Obviously, by the time you listen to this, that might well have become a bit more clear. Anything stand out to you, JR, that you wanted to mention about Larson? I know you talked about him at the top of the show there, but kind of interested to get your thoughts. I know you were super excited to see this whole thing happen and to see how he got on in the race.
Yeah, and I think just to clarify, my point earlier, obviously I didn't want to put it down to put the fact that he ended up sort of further back at the beginning of the race down to down to the fact that he just lost a bunch of track position or something. Obviously he had this kind of small mistake that's easy enough to do, whether it's upshifting or downshifting, on starts and restarts. Like, it is kind of hard to, you're used to being in like 4th, 5th, and 6th gears and kind of working between those three. And that the other gears are just these kind of weirdly spread out acceleration gears that are even, your entire gear stack for the race is different than what you run around for like most of practice in. Just because you're kind of trying some different things out. Your accelerations are different coming out of the pit lane versus having to kind of reorient that gear stack to be good for starts and restarts and all this other kind of stuff. So it's easy to make either, you're getting woed up and you just kind of go for the downshift paddle because it's there basically, but not really realizing that you're used to shifting from like 5th to 4th in that situation. And because it's a restart and everybody's going slow, I sort of accidentally shifted from 4th to 3rd. And now you're in like a totally weird rev range, like right at the top of the RPM band, trying to reaccelerate, or it's, the other way around, that you've, ended up in the wrong gear and, in a doggy gear, trying to accelerate because you've kind of lost track, so I'm not even saying that I think it's because Kyle lost track of where he was at in the stack, but I guess I bring all that up just to say that it's easy to do. Basically, it's easy to kind of end up in a gear that you didn't really mean to be in. And so I agree with you. I mean, I've been super impressed with him, all month long. The way that he raced was the same. I mean, this race, I think, has gotten, if you're not up at the front for the entire race, it's gotten harder to kind of be in the pack. The cars, just compared to the way that they were, certainly compared to the way that they were when Kurt came and did this, and even when Fernando was here, those guys, were both at the front more often than not. And in both of those situations, that was kind of the original DW12 when Kurt did it. And then the Aero Kit cars, when Fernando was here, they were just more efficient. They were cleaner through the air, basically. And they were lighter weight cars and, no aero screen, no universal kit, whatever, as the cars are now. As the car, the way that it is today is, once you're 4 or 5 cars back, it's very hard to do anything with it. And so to see any passes getting made, from mid-pack, like that happens when you're really confident, you really know what you're doing, and you've actually got the skill set to pull it off. Kyle has the benefit, maybe compared to some of those cars, of just being in a slightly faster car or something. But we've seen that matter little in various situations in years past, where you get fast guys that for one reason have a lousy pit stop or end up off strategy or have something go wrong. They end up back in like 20th and they just end up getting stuck there, for huge parts of the race. So to your point, I think the fact that he he looked like he belonged there, I guess, was ultimately, I think my takeaway was, okay, he had a couple little mistakes. He can clean those things up in the future. Hopefully that is also his takeaway and Rick Hendrick's takeaway and everybody else who was a part of this, because while this was different, while this was very different than Robbie Gordon or these other guys that have, over the years kind of come and done the double, that feels very much like they're sort of getting this, they've got a window to kind of make the 500, the Indy 500 part of it work. And, people kind of like let them do it as long as like it doesn't all go to shit or, start to become problematic somehow. I feel like in almost every one of the NASCAR guys coming and doing the double situation that we've had, it's been with a very short leash. This was different than those situations because I think in part because Hendrick was so invested in the 500 part of it. They're literally the sponsor on the car. That changes the dynamic of the whole thing a little bit at least, but that and that they, you saw that they ended up prioritizing Indy and keeping him there, and they got the waiver from NASCAR and all this kind of stuff. I guess just with all that said, I was I was finding myself reading Kyle's post race, post day, sort of tweet and that kind of stuff. It seemed very downtrodden, like that he felt like he had let everybody down.
He said that.
And yeah, and that there's a part of that you don't want to read too much into it, but a part of it that you feel like, oh, well, I really hope I get the chance to do this again, but I kind of, it's like a dog that's done something wrong and has their like tail between their legs and goes and just goes and sits in their crate, that it's a little bit like, no, you don't need to feel that bad about this, like you chose to do a really hard thing. You had a lot of really good people around you. This could have easy, had it not been for the weather or like some little things being different, like this could have gone great. Like, this has the chance to continue being great. I want to see you. I want to see you come back for the next 10 years and do the double. Like that's, So I kind of, I just hope that the fact that we ended up with weather, the fact that you kind of had a bunch of things just not go according to plan here. He ended up having some little issues in the race that are easy mistakes to make that everybody, Scott Dixon is the most recent guy to make the same mistake. High profile. Well, there's a bunch of other drivers that have had drive-through penalties for speeding at pit lane, even since Scott did it. That just aren't as high profile, that they're not guys that are running up front that you like, as a fan base care as much about or something. So I guess I look at these things I obviously look at them with a more zoomed out perspective as a race fan, that these kinds of things, Kyle Larson coming and doing the double, even if it doesn't go perfectly, is just such an incredible thing to have happen during the year of motorsports, that even if it doesn't go well, that just seems so worth it to me. That I hope that that's the perspective that everybody involved in this effort for him this year ends up having about it, is sort of that in the big scheme of things, though this didn't go exactly according to plan, it was still worth it, and it'll be worth it for them to continue doing it.
For sure. And I don't think Hendrick can afford to let this fester for Kyle. Like, he's going to think about this for a long time. And if they don't do the double again for a long period of time, I feel like this is going to eat away at him, that he feels like he made these mistakes and that he feels like he's to blame. When in actual fact, the worst thing he did really was the lock up going into the pits. And I feel like every single driver on the grid has done that at some point. It's a really common thing to see. So, yeah, definitely want him back. And I think the difference between the ones that you mentioned, and I say this with absolute all due respect, but none of the other drivers that have done the double have been considered one of the best drivers in the world at the point of time that they've done it. And they haven't done it in combination of that, the fact that McLaren is involved. It's more of a global thing, and I think NASCAR recognise the impact that has globally and how much attention this event has brought to them as well. And I think they're open to I think NASCAR really switched on with that kind of thing, and I'm sure they're really pro, having this happen again. I'm sure they don't want to make a trend of drivers not doing their races, but I think everyone can acknowledge that this one's a bit different. I did want to say just before we leave, if you didn't get a chance to read my pre-race story on Kyle, I would go back and do that at the-race.com. But in there, Zach Brown said that he's spoken to Kyle Larson about getting him in a Formula One car. So to see him test an F1 car would be, just awesome as well. Like for you were mentioning just being a race fan and wanting to see this happen again, JR. I'm sure that's another thing that you'd like to see is Kyle Larson in an F1 car. We've got Detroit coming up this weekend, so we're straight into it again as usual. I remember that year a couple of years ago where we had the bye week between Indy and Detroit, which was a blissful experience for everyone involved in the IndyCar paddock. But we're not lucky enough to have that this time. So straight into Detroit. I feel like after that Detroit race, obviously JR and I will do our usual kind of analysis and breakdown of that race, but we'll also get into a few more storylines from the Indy 500, I'm sure, as they emerge through the week. But wanted to get to this pod as soon as you could, so you could hear Josef Newgarden speaking immediately after his win, which was super cool, and a little bit of analysis into the race. So that's all for this week's episode of the Race IndyCar podcast.
The Athletic.